Ever wondered what would happen if Peter Griffin finally had to answer for all his ridiculous, chaotic, and downright insane crimes in Family Guy? This dude's racking up charges faster than you can say.
Shut up, Meg.
His crimes are so outrageous that his record would put him behind bars for the rest of his life. He wouldn't be seeing a sunrise outside of jail for the rest of his life. Why, you ask? Well, let's see for ourselves, starting with his first crime. Remember that time Peter Griffin won the lottery and turned into an absolute menace? Yeah, Lottery Fever, Season 10, Episode 1, gave us Peter in his most spiteful form. With his pockets suddenly full of cash, Peter decided to play generous friend with Quagmire and Joe. But of course, it wouldn't be Peter without a twist. He humiliates them right after. In one scene, he gets them to perform a musical duet, all while aiming a BB gun at them.
Another season, another reason for making whoopee.
Quagmire and Joe are nervously playing along, fully aware of what could happen next. Peter, being Peter, decides to up the chaos. When Joe nervously asks him to avoid the face,
"Look, you aren't gonna shoot us in the eye, are you, Peter?"
Oh, no, Joe, I wouldn't try to shoot you in the eye.
Peter, with a signature smirk, shoots him right in the eye. A moment later, when Quagmire dares to complain, Peter shoots him straight in the throat without a second thought. This isn't just a prank gone too far, it's pure sadism. And what's worse is that Peter looks almost gleeful while doing it. Real nice, huh? But let's get serious for a moment. If Peter pulled this kind of stunt in real life, the consequences would be no laughing matter. Shooting someone with a BB gun, even as a so-called prank, is no joke. It's classified as assault with a weapon. Aggravated assault can easily earn you up to 5 years behind bars, especially when it involves deliberate harm. And let's not forget, Peter shot Joe in the eye and Quagmire in the throat, causing some serious damage. We're not just talking about a little sting here. Those injuries could have long-term effects. In most states, this level of assault could also result in hefty fines alongside jail time, so if the law had anything to say about it, Peter would definitely be looking at 5 years in prison, possibly more depending on the severity of Quagmire and Joe's injuries. And let's be real, he'd deserve every single one of those years. Next up, we have Peter's role in one of the most chaotic incidents in Family Guy history, blowing up the Quahog Bridge in Season 11, Episode 16. After a wild accident in Vegas,
Myself back in such a situation. Oh! Ground! Ah, damn it!
Peter finds himself in the hospital, and of course, he ends up making friends with a total stranger. Sounds innocent, right? Not quite. The stranger turns out to be a little terrorist with plans to blow up the Quahog Bridge. Instead of using his common sense, which, let's be honest, Peter is severely lacking, he ends up getting involved. Peter is tasked with driving a van loaded with explosives straight to the bridge, and while he does eventually try to get the guy arrested, he acts way too late, and boom, the bridge is toast. We're talking cars destroyed, chaos everywhere, and presumably lots of people killed. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Peter's stubbornness. If he had just listened to Lois when she warned him about the suspicious new friend, this disaster could have been completely avoided. But no, in true Peter fashion, he ignores every red flag, marches forward blindly, and ends up being a puppet in a terrorist plot. Let's not forget the man is about as sharp as a bowling ball, and everyone except Peter seemed to see the danger coming from a mile away. So, what would this mean for Peter in the real world? Well, being an accomplice in a terrorist act, even if he didn't directly detonate the explosives, would land him in some serious trouble. In many countries, aiding terrorism can carry a life sentence, or at the very least, decades in prison. In the United States, for instance, being knowingly involved in a terrorist conspiracy can result in a sentence of 20 years to life. And considering that the bridge explosion caused massive damage, injuries, and likely fatalities, Peter could be facing a very, very long time behind bars. Even if we give him the benefit of the doubt that he wasn't fully aware of the plot until it was too late, he still willingly drove a van packed with explosives to a bridge full of innocent people. That's reckless endangerment at best, and terrorism at worst. If I were the judge, Peter wouldn't be seeing the outside of a jail cell for at least 25 years, and honestly, that's being generous. But knowing Peter, he'd probably find some cartoonishly absurd way to make friends with his cellmates and turn it into some kind of wild sitcom plot. But still, it wouldn't change the fact that his reckless behavior led to loss of life and destruction, something far beyond a typical Family Guy joke. So yeah, add another 25 years to Peter's rap sheet and we're just getting started. In Season 14, Episode 9, Peter's neighborhood watch idea spirals out of control and ends in disaster. When the Griffin family's couch gets stolen, Peter decides to form a neighborhood watch and generously hands out guns to his friends.
Process.
Got him.
Oh, how'd you get him so quick?
That was easy. Like pressing that easy button at the office supply store.
Because, you know, what could possibly go wrong? One night, Peter notices a shadowy figure sneaking into Cleveland's house through the window.
What the hell? Hey, you!
With all the finesse of an overzealous wannabe action hero, Peter grabs his gun and shoots. Unfortunately, the mysterious figure turns out to be Cleveland's son, Cleveland Jr., who was simply trying to sneak back into his own house after a night out. Classic case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time if you're unlucky enough to have Peter Griffin as your neighbor. Of course, after shooting his friend's son, Peter is accused of being racist. Honestly, it's not hard to see why. This is one of those moments where Peter's stupidity and lack of awareness hit an all-time low. Like, seriously, Peter? It's pretty normal for teenagers to sneak back into their own house late at night. But instead of doing something rational, like, I don't know, yelling out, "Who's there?" Peter just goes full Rambo and shoots without asking questions. No wonder Cleveland wasn't exactly thrilled about it.
Peter, get out of here. I'm never gonna forgive you for what you did.
So let's talk about what kind of punishment Peter would face in real life for this one. Shooting someone, even if it's accidental, can be considered aggravated assault or even attempted manslaughter, depending on the circumstances. In most places, aggravated assault with a firearm carries a hefty sentence, often up to 20 years in prison. And since Cleveland Jr. was an innocent, unarmed teenager, it's likely the court would lean toward a harsher sentence. Peter could easily be looking at a decade or two behind bars for this reckless stunt, especially considering how careless he was. If there's one thing that's consistent about Peter, it's his inability to think things through, and in this case, it led to a potentially fatal mistake. Honestly, if Peter had just stuck to calling the police or even just turning on a flashlight, Cleveland Jr. wouldn't have ended up in the hospital, and Peter wouldn't be facing yet another serious charge. But this is Family Guy, and Peter Griffin isn't exactly known for his logical decision-making skills. If I were the judge, I'd probably hand Peter a solid 15-year sentence for this one, not just for the act itself, but as a lesson that you don't go around shooting people without even checking who they are first. Unfortunately, common sense and Peter Griffin just don't mix. So, add another 15 years to Peter's ever-growing rap sheet. And now, we've got one of Peter's cruelest bonding moments yet. In the courtship of Stewie's father, Season 4, Episode 16, Louis makes the mistake of asking Peter to bond with their son Stewie.
All I'm saying is that you just need to find an activity that you and Stewie can share.
Peter, being Peter, takes this as an opportunity to turn father-son bonding time into a series of ridiculous pranks aimed at tormenting Louis.
Okay, Stewie, get the camera ready.
But the PSD resistance? Pushing Louise's car into the lake with her still inside. That's right, Peter and Stewie actually push the car into the lake while Louise is still trapped in it, and then they just walk away like nothing happened. Now, let's break down just how twisted this is. Louis had originally complained that Stewie was developing some violent tendencies, and what does Peter do? Instead of, encouraging his kid to maybe be a bit less of a sociopath, he teams up with Stewie to harass Louis even more. And pushing a car into a lake is no small prank. It's dangerous, reckless, and shows an absolute disregard for Louis's safety. They don't even bother to check if she gets out safely, which, if we're being honest, isn't exactly a high bar for basic human decency. So what would Peter be looking at if this went down in real life? Well, this one is pretty clear. Endangerment and attempted murder. Seriously, pushing a car into a body of water while someone's still inside? That's a felony, and it could easily lead to drowning. In many places, attempted murder can carry a sentence of up to 20 years or more, especially considering how premeditated this act was. Peter and Stewie didn't just act impulsively, they went through with an entire plan just to mess with Louis. It's a miracle she survived, and let's face it, if the authorities were involved, Peter would be looking at a long stint in prison. If I were the judge, I'd probably hand him at least 20 years behind bars. Attempted murder is no joke, and Peter's complete lack of remorse makes it even worse. So, let's add another 20 years to Peter's growing list of offenses. And at this point, he's racking up sentences faster than anyone can count. Whether it's failing as a father, an accomplice to terrorism, or just being a danger to everyone around him, Peter Griffin has proven time and again that he's his own worst enemy. And somehow, there is still more to come. Stick around because Peter's next crimes only get more dangerous. And here we have one of Peter's most jaw-dropping crimes yet, cannibalizing his own friend.
Give me that.
In The Perfect Castaway Season 4, Episode 12, Peter and this guy finds themselves stranded in the middle of the ocean after a hurricane leaves them shipwrecked.
Be careful. The tiniest prick will pop these things.
The desperation kicks in, and while everyone is freaking out about their lack of food, Peter takes matters into his own hands, or should I say, takes a bite into his friend's legs?
my legs?
Yeah, see, now this is why I didn't say anything. I knew you were gonna get like this.
What the?
Yeah, Peter decides to start eating Joe's legs without anyone knowing. Now, Joe is paraplegic, so he doesn't actually feel any pain, but come on, Peter! Eating your buddy's legs without permission is a new low, even for you. Peter's logic here seems to be that since Joe can't feel his legs, they're fair game. But if you think about it, this makes the whole situation even darker. Peter isn't just taking food for himself, he's making the incredibly selfish decision to prioritize his own survival over his friend's dignity. And to do so without even discussing it with the group. He didn't bother to think about how traumatizing it would be for Joe or anyone else to find out that their friend had been casually munching on them. Plus, Peter clearly didn't consider that the rest of the group might want to, not starve to death either. It's every man for himself according to Peter, and apparently that includes taking a bite out of your own buddy. Now, let's take the scenario to the real world. Cannibalism is not just morally appalling, it's also illegal under most circumstances. Cutting off someone's limbs without consent? That's aggravated assault, and it could easily lead to charges of attempted murder, depending on how much damage is inflicted. In many jurisdictions, Peter would be facing anywhere from 10 to 20 years for the assault alone. And let's not forget the whole eating human flesh aspect. In some places, cannibalism itself is a separate offense that could add even more years to his sentence. If we are being generous, we'd say Peter is looking at a good 15 years for this crime, assuming, of course, Joe is feeling particularly forgiving and doesn't push for the maximum penalty. But perhaps the best part of this episode is that karma hits Peter pretty quickly. After all this leg-eating nonsense, Peter ends up getting replaced by Louis and Brian, who marry each other while thinking Peter would never return. Imagine surviving on your best friend's legs only to come back and find out your wife is now with your dog. It's a fitting twist of fate, and frankly, Peter kind of had it coming. So, let's add another 15 years to Peter's rap sheet. The man has absolutely no boundaries when it comes to survival, and somehow, his next crimes are even more absurd. And just when you think Peter couldn't get any worse, he decides to target Quagmire's new feline friend. In Season 7, Episode 12, Peter's jealousy takes over when Quagmire starts spending more time with a stray cat he found in his basement. Peter's response? Well, in true Griffin style, it's to make sure that cat doesn't stay around too long.
Oh my God!
Peter, you killed it!
Well, you guys relax. He's got 8 more lives. Okay, 7 more lives. 6. 5.
Behind Quagmire's back, Peter starts performing dangerous pranks on the poor feline. Why? Because in his warped sense of humor, Peter believes that since cats have 9 lives, killing 1 or 2 of them shouldn't be an issue. It's an absolutely ridiculous and downright cruel thought process, but that's Peter for you. Even Cleveland and Joe, who are usually willing to put up with Peter's antics, are horrified. Peter not only harms an innocent animal, but he also shows no remorse whatsoever. When Quagmire shows up offering a reward of $50 for anyone who finds the missing cat, Peter casually admits that he killed it. Killing someone's pet is one thing, but taking their money on top of it, that's another level of pity, even for Peter. The episode ends there, so we never get to see what consequences Peter faces, but let's be honest, he's gotten away with far worse. Now in the real world, animal cruelty is no joke. In many places, intentionally harming or killing a pet can lead to significant jail time. Depending on the jurisdiction, Peter could be facing anywhere from a year to 5 years in prison for animal abuse. And let's not forget the fines. Animal cruelty laws often come with hefty financial penalties as well. Given how deliberate Peter was about the whole thing, it's safe to say he'd be looking at the higher end of that spectrum. If I were the judge, I'd slap Peter with a solid 5-year sentence for his callous disregard for life. Whether it's a human or a cat, Peter just doesn't seem to care. So, let's tack on another 5 years to Peter's ever-growing list of offenses. Whether it's hurting his friends, endangering his family, or now harming innocent animals, Peter Griffin has truly done it all. And yet somehow, we're still not finished. And now, as if Peter hadn't racked up enough charges, we get to see him take his family dysfunction to a whole new level in Season 9, Episode 3. Peter's jealousy of his father-in-law Carter Pewterschmidt and his obscene wealth knows no bounds. So, whether Peter catches Carter having an affair, he sees it as the perfect opportunity to fleece the old man. Instead of, maybe minding his own business or even doing the right thing by letting Carter and Louis handle it, Peter opts for blackmail.
Ah, that was excellent. When I clenched it, you took your fingers away. You were right to do that.
Oh my God! Mr. Pewterschmidt, you're having an affair? Ew!
No, this is my sister.
Ew!
Naturally, Peter uses the blackmail money for ridiculous luxury adventures because, of course, he does. But here's where it gets even worse. Peter doesn't even bother to keep his end of the bargain. After miking Carter for all he's worth, Peter still exposes him, leading to a chain of consequences that ultimately ends with Carter's wife going back to her former love.
And he's not just saying that because I covered for him about his affair.
Now, don't get me wrong, Carter was definitely in the wrong here for cheating, but Peter's actions takes the term messy family drama to a whole new level. Instead of keeping his word and staying out of the situation, Peter went ahead and turned the entire affair into his personal gain, without a shred of honor or respect for his in-laws. Even stranger, Louis just stays out of it completely, leaving Peter to clean up his own mess, which he clearly never does. Now, what would happen if this played out in real life? Well, blackmail is a pretty serious crime, especially when it involves using incriminating information for financial gain. Depending on the jurisdiction, blackmail can carry a penalty of anywhere from 5 to 10 years in prison, and considering Peter's blatant disregard for any form of decency or respect, it's likely he'd end up facing the higher end of that spectrum as well. He basically twisted the knife in Carter's back twice, first by extorting him, then by betraying him. It's safe to say that if Peter found himself in front of a judge, he'd be looking at a solid decade in jail. And honestly, this whole situation just speaks to Peter's moral compass, or a lack thereof. Even when he has the chance to do something decent, he can't help but make everything worse for everyone involved. So, let's add another 10 years to Peter's growing criminal record. At this point, Peter's rap sheet is longer than a CVS receipt, and yet somehow, there is still more chaos to uncover. And now, for one of Peter's most ridiculous and straight-up appalling stunts, flinging a dead horse into Mort Goldman's pharmacy.
Oh, boy.
In Season 7, Episode 8, Peter, as always, gets involved in something he's hilariously underqualified for. This time, he buys a horse at a Kentucky auction and tries his hand at racing in the Quahog Derby. Sounds innocent enough, right? Well, not exactly. Because Peter barely trains the horse, it ends up going berserk during the race, injuring spectators left and right before eventually having a heart attack.
What's this? It looks like Till Death has taken a right turn and is heading into the stands. Dear God, I could describe the horror I am witnessing.
And what does Peter decide to do with a dead animal? Does he give it a respectful burial, or maybe just leave it be? Nah, that's too normal for Peter. Instead, he flings it into Mort's pharmacy like it's garbage. Now, what Peter did would likely land him in some serious legal trouble. Throwing a dead horse into someone's business? That's not just disgusting, it's criminal damage, and depending on the jurisdiction, it could lead to charges of property destruction and even environmental violations. Improper disposal of a dead animal could easily add up to a fine of several $1,000s, and if the damage to Mort's store was extensive, Peter could also be looking at jail time. In many places, property damage on this level could lead up to a year in prison, plus restitution for all the costs of the damage. If I were the judge, I'd probably hand Peter a year behind bars just for this complete lack of respect for others' property, and frankly, for his appalling treatment of an animal's remains. Peter's got a knack for thinking he's invincible, and maybe a stint in jail would finally make him realize there are consequences to his actions. Next, Peter Griffin takes his antics to a whole new level by committing treason. In Season 2, Episode 18, Peter discovers that his house technically isn't part of the United States while trying to get a zoning permit for a pool. Now, instead of sorting out this bureaucratic hiccup like a reasonable person, Peter decides to take the Christopher Columbus approach. He declares himself the founder of an independent nation and names it Pretoria.
Pretoria, a new foreign country which was founded this week, right here in our own backyard.
That's right, Peter Griffin, now a self-declared ruler, and if that wasn't enough, Peter even takes it one step further by invading his neighbor Joe's property and claiming his pool for Pretoria. That's right, stealing your neighbor's pool is somehow considered diplomatic relations in Peter's world. And of course, Peter being Peter, things escalate in the most ridiculous way possible. He invites dictators to barbecues, parades around breaking American laws with impunity, and causes so much chaos that the US military eventually declares war on Pretoria. Talk about overstepping boundaries. Not only is Peter's reckless behavior a massive inconvenience for his neighbors, but it also directly impacts his family. His kids can no longer attend school, and Louis is unable to move freely. Honestly, it's kind of impressive how Peter can manage to ruin everyone's lives with a single, misguided declaration of independence. Now, let's talk about what this would mean in the real world. Declaring yourself an independent nation and stealing land from your neighbors isn't just quirky, it's an act of treason. And in most countries, treason is one of the most serious crimes you can commit. In the United States, it can carry a penalty of up to life in prison or even the death penalty in extreme cases. Given that Peter literally declared war against the US government, he would most certainly be facing some major consequences. And let's not forget the whole invading Joe's property and stealing his pool stunt. That's breaking and entering, theft, and about a dozen other violations. If Peter were to be tried for treason, he'd easily be looking at a life sentence, and that's if the judge is feeling generous. Honestly, the fact that Peter thought he could just declare independence, break laws left and right, and face no consequences is peak Peter Griffin. His sheer ignorance and ego make him think he can get away with anything, and unfortunately, in the world of Family Guy, he usually does. But in the real world, this kind of reckless behavior would have serious life-altering repercussions. If I were the judge, Peter would be looking at life behind bars, and that's being merciful. And now, Peter Griffin has officially crossed a line that even the Joker himself would applaud, blowing up a hospital. In Season 15, Episode 6, Peter's misguided beliefs about vaccinations lead him down a terrifying path.
And even death. Fact. Vaccinate rhymes with masturbate. Would you let a doctor do that to your kid?
After deciding against vaccinating Stevie following a bad incident, Stevie falls ill. But does Peter take this as a sign that maybe vaccines aren't as evil as he thinks? Of course not. Instead, Peter doubles down and decides that the best way to ensure that no vaccines are available in Quahog is to blow up an entire hospital. That's right, he channels his inner Gotham villain and takes down an entire healthcare facility to make sure those dangerous vaccines stay out of the picture. And of course, he doesn't even think about the countless lives that might be lost in the process. Peter didn't bother giving any warning or allowing an evacuation, he just blew it up. The lack of foresight is breathtaking, even by Peter's standards. And Peter never stops to think about the repercussions, not until he himself falls ill and desperately needs the very vaccine he tried to obliterate. Classic Peter, creating a catastrophe and then suffering from the fallout. So what would this mean in the real world? Blowing up a hospital is pretty much as serious as it gets. It's terrorism, plain and simple, and it could easily lead to multiple charges: domestic terrorism, murder, reckless endangerment, and destruction of property. The consequences for terrorism alone can include a life sentence, without parole, or even the death penalty, depending on the country. And considering Peter didn't give anyone a chance to evacuate, he could also be facing multiple counts of murder. Each one of those could carry a life sentence. Even if we are generous and assume no one died, destroying a hospital would still land Peter a minimum of several decades behind bars, possibly even a life sentence due to the sheer scale of destruction and danger to human life. After reviewing all of Peter Griffin's crimes, it's safe to say he's facing a mind-boggling amount of time behind bars. With multiple life sentences, countless years for assault, reckless endangerment, terrorism, and more, Peter's total estimated sentence could easily add up to over 500 years in prison, not counting possible parole denials and other penalties. And now, here's a question for all of you. Is there another character from Family Guy you'd like to see face their own reckoning? How long would their prison sentence be? Let us know in the comment section below. See you in the next video, and until then, cheers!